Those of you still involved in the feeding frenzy next door, if I could ask you to come in. Thank you, Helena. Thank you, Virginia. Grab your seats. To everybody on the live stream, good morning. Good to have you with us. We're at the Nasdaq, at the top of the Naspers building, the News 24 building at the foreshore in Cape Town, as our breakfast delegates take their seats. My name is Bruce Whitfield, and I am associated with News 24. I present a weekly podcast called Bruce Whitfield's Business Week. It says what it is on the can. We wrap up what is happening in the world of business every single week, just what you need to know. And what you need to know about the budget 2026. This time last year, there was no budget. This time, we have a budget. We have a sense of optimism, not shared by Moody's, unfortunately. Not yet anyway, and we're going to discuss why there is that resistance to the optimism that was expressed in the bond market, the optimism that was expressed on the JSE. We went up to 127,000 on the all-share index yesterday, and it wasn't all gold and platinum shares. There was a little bit of domestic impetus there as well, and the currency at multi-year best levels. I don't want to call it highs, but certainly better levels. And who would have thought this time last year, when we were looking at the possibility of a 2 percentage point VAT increase, that yesterday's budget would be even remotely possible. It makes carrying these things around essential. The SARS Commissioner is here. If he says I owe him something, I need to be able to harlate and base. But I would like to welcome our panel, Edward Kieswetter. You can see that he's preparing for retirement. He's wearing those loafer shoes that pensioners wear when they go on cruises. His term as SARS Commissioner ends in April. Carol Payton, who's writer-at-large and was responsible for a whole host of the stories that you saw on News 24 yesterday, and we'll see the mopping up of the budget. Golan Bellam is the chief economist at Standard Bank, and of course this breakfast is a partnership between News 24 and Standard Bank. And Busi Mavuso, who is unsettlingly calm, and I'm yet to see whether I can raise her inner temperature today. That is the purpose. So welcome, everybody. Lovely to have you. Out of 10, Busi, give me a score on the budget 2026.
It has to be a 6. It's definitely a 6.
I think that's probably the best score you've ever given.
Probably. I think so. Yeah, absolutely. It's been
Why
a
a
very
6
good budget.
and not a 5 or a 7?
There's obviously a whole lot more that needs to be done, but I think it's very good that we're seeing the macroeconomic indicators that have actually gone up. We're seeing the results of fiscal discipline. We're seeing the pragmatism coming through in the budget. We're seeing the credibility that is actually coming through. We're seeing the budget being very considerate and recognizing the pressure that the average man on the street is actually facing. All of us as South Africans, you know, that's demonstrated in tax reliefs. We're seeing government committing to reforms. That was iterated in the SONA, and the Minister of Finance confirmed it yesterday. So it's definitely a 6, and it must just continue to go in that trajectory.
Gulam?
Slightly more generous. 7.5.
7.5?
With the half perhaps.
That's like a university first class pass.
Which, with your Woolworths bag, you don't require.
You don't know what's in it.
So I guess you're waiting for the motivation for 7.5.
I
Let's say
am.
a few things. One, continuity. The budget had, in recent years, committed to fiscal consolidation, and that has been affirmed in this particular reading. Secondly, elevated allocations to infrastructure, contained spending, and the boot on the neck of individuals, specifically with respect to personal income tax, has been relaxed. Over the last decade, personal income tax and middle and high income individuals more naturally as well have been the soft underbelly of balancing the budget with about 150 billion rand worth of cumulative additional tax hikes imposed, and now we've seen some release, some relax. Of course, as a function of elevated revenues. So stitching it all together, I would score it respectable.
Respectable. Carol, you can't possibly be that generous.
No, unfortunately not.
Excellent.
I also give it a 6. And the reason for that is because, look, I think we've got a finance minister who's doing the right thing, a president who's doing the right thing, but we still have almost 80% debt to GDP, and we shouldn't forget about that. So that actual debt mountain hasn't actually started declining yet.
But I saw a very sexy graph that says we'll have debt to GDP at 65% by 2032. It's all fine.
Yeah, well, I hope so. But so I do believe that there's the intent in this administration to bring it down. But I think that there is this big danger for me within the government, within the cabinet, within the sort of ruling parties, to think, well, we've done it. We've done it now. Everyone said, great, our budget's great. That's excellent. And that complacency, I think, is very dangerous. And I think I would agree with Julius Malema, by the way, who said that the budget lacked a growth strategy. So, I would agree.
So
with
what's
you.
happened? Who is he and where is he coming from?
He's a guy in a red overall, kind
Right.
of pops up now and then.
But but it's fabulous that even Julius Malema is pointing to the elephant in the room, that without growth, we don't get to a place where we get the 5 million jobs that we need to get to bring unemployment to some sort of level of control, where we're not having as the biggest line item in the budget at 16.9% of the budget, social spending. 18 million people on social grants. You've got to release them from that particular line item and turn them into contributors to tax rather than as consumers of tax money. Edward Kieswetter, why 11 out of 10?
Because I'm historically disadvantaged and bad at math. Well, I mean, I think firstly, according to News 24, probably 4 out of 10, because they only look at how well we collect debt and not how well we collect revenue.
I'll get there. We'll talk about it. It's quite an important part of the conversation. But you've got that off your chest now. Where did the budget land positively, and what still worries you as an outgoing SARS commissioner?
Well, I think a number of issues. So first of all, on the absence of a strong enough growth, clarity around growth, I share that concern. I do think the budget attempts to address that by biasing the little space that we have towards infrastructure spend. My concern there is the ability to execute, and it's the game changers for that, I believe, which maybe has gone unnoticed, but is fundamental. The first is, for the first time, whether it's desperation or realization is now moot. But I get the sense for the first time, government understands it needs public-private partnerships to succeed, that it doesn't have all the resources or the wherewithal to execute these plans. For me, that's a game changer. The second game changer is, for the first time, we have unsolicited bids, which means that this archaic way of waiting for an RFI and an RFP when you know that you can do something has been broken. In discussion with Treasury, they've had a conservative approach by limiting to 2 billion, but I think I sense a readiness to lift that lid. And we've seen the benefit in the electricity sector. We didn't get out of load shedding because we fixed Eskom. We got out of load shedding because we fixed the electricity sector. Similarly, logistics and other sectors. And then a huge concern that I still have, which the President signposted in his SONA, the Minister to some extent raised that, but again it's an execution issue, is whether we can truly give crime, corruption and the illicit economy a death blow. If we can't do that, then in fact we've seen significant growth in the illicit economy. If the scholars are to be believed, then 20 years ago it was 5% of GDP. Today it's between 12 and 15%. If you translate that into numbers, it's anywhere between 800 billion and 1.2 trillion rand worth, and just the tax take on that is between 200 and 300 billion. So it's a real challenge, apart from our safety and our social coherence, just on an economic front. If we can deal with the illicit economy, we'll see a spurt in growth.
Richard, or Boris Rivett-Karnak, the guy who runs SAB in South Africa, was telling me on the podcast last week, saying that this illicit economy, certainly in booze and cigarettes, is 100 billion rand in terms of a shortfall. Yet we keep upping the sin taxes on booze and cigarettes like we're going to collect more. We're not dealing with the fundamental issues that underpin the crisis of governance of South Africa. And that reality is not, no budget can fix that, though.
Yeah. You know, I mean, at my age, you can't make career-limiting statements.
Well, you can't anymore, so what they're going to do about it?
But implicit in the way government is organized, not just South Africa, around the world, governments aren't organized to win, okay? They have these departmental silos with perverse incentives, often competing each other and undermining success. And one of the narratives I have started, both within the presidency, but also with the Minister of Finance, is to say we have to think differently about how we allocate resources and how about we coordinate effort. At the moment, for example, the reason why we have had limited impact on crime, corruption, and the illicit economy is we have a totally fragmented approach, both in terms of effort, but also resource allocation. If you go through the budget, you'll see so much money has been allocated to SAPS, to SNDF, to the BMA, without understanding how much money have we allocated to deal with crime and corruption. Because we don't think about allocating resources to a phenomena or a problem or an opportunity. We allocate it to departments.
We used to have a thing called the National Development Plan, that's what it was called. There is still a National Planning Commission. And on my vaccination certificate, which I found the other day, NDP was on it. So it's there somewhere. But that was your good friend Trevor Manuel's project for a long period of time. And ever since then, he was shifted aside out of government. That's been as good as dead. Is it time to resurrect? Do you resurrect or just resurrect the National Development Plan? But that's we have to have some sort of coordinated overview, surely.
It's interesting. It's interesting that in the diagnostic of the section of the plan, the two things that the plan highlights as our inability to translate plan into action is in fact not understanding how we work together as social partners, and secondly, the inability to translate good plans into action. So we have an execution problem before we have a resource problem in South
Hendrik
Africa.
Tutoy was making that point at a conference, I think just 2 weeks ago also. South Africa doesn't have a monetary problem, there's actually very few problems as such, but where it falls short is execution. So how, Busi, then, do we begin to address South Africa's execution crisis?
Put the right people in positions, Bruce. I think that is the long and short of it. This issue of having incompetence and mediocrity within government is the biggest problem. Hiring people who don't have a clue what they are doing and who are not even trained to do what they are doing. Interestingly enough, I was actually listening to the commissioner. You gave a keynote address at an event in November last year, and you spoke about the criteria that China applies to appointing public servants. He said they look at character, they look at capability to do the job, they look at incorruptibility, they look at its 5 things. There's 2 other things. Character.
Sorry,
Yes.
just get the microphone up, sorry. Sorry, start again, Edward,
Yeah.
sorry.
So it's character,
Yeah.
requirements for the job, can you do it? Track record of delivery, have you done it before?
Yes.
Work ethic
Yeah.
and incorruptibility.
So, I mean, really, we are nowhere close to applying that criteria. You know, not just in public servants, but in the ministers as well. You know, a lot of these ministers actually have an opposite track record, but we continue to put them in positions. You know, I was looking yesterday at Parliament, I saw Tembi, Minister Tembi, the one who stole from Limpopo and was moved from Minister of Justice to somewhere else.
Carol's helping us on this one.
Yeah,
Similani.
exactly. She was, and I mean, a whole lot of them. You have a lot of these
It's
thieves.
so much easier to know who the honest people are because the list is much shorter.
You have a lot of these thieves that are masquerading to be government officials. We need to deal with that. So you're never going to be able to deal with the delivery problem if you actually haven't dealt with putting the right people in power.
And if you haven't got that building block, then the private sector, Gulambellam, who wants to participate in South Africa's continued recovery, wants to capitalize on the multiplicity of opportunities that sit in that rebuild, is going to be reluctant to put capital into the bottomless pit. So how then do we fix it?
It didn't take you long to get Boosie very animated.
No, she's not even. I haven't even begun yet. That was just the warm up.
So perhaps I'm going to spend the next few minutes justifying my 7.5 judgment and say, like many things in life, the budget is an incremental concept. So we've got to judge the budget year on year for the alterations it makes. And specifically, so what does it do for governance and what does it do for state incapacity, which speaks to this idea of a state that cannot execute. And I think it's well understood. And the budget does at least a few things. So direction of travel, legislation to restrain funds that should be flowing to municipalities, and instead, where there is a deficient municipality, legislation will then allow for that to be skewed to the DBSA, for example, or one or two other pools of absorptive capability. It speaks with regard to governance around municipalities, where municipalities that are not functioning will invite intervention. And it speaks also to intervention on the part of provincial and national level. So at the margin, this leaning into deficient municipalities, where we know municipal actions influence national outcomes, that has been the narrative of the last few years. And I think at the margin, with regard to this elevated infrastructure spend that is through the BFI, the budget facility on infrastructure, and a few other mechanisms, and the enhancements made to PPP frameworks, is inviting the private sector. So the private sector, the way it leaned in very heavily in resolving the electricity shortfall, is now leaning into water. It's leaning into logistics, as we well know, and it could be leaning into sanitation. So last year was also an auspicious occasion with regard to a budget, a bond that was issued, an inaugural bond for infrastructure, which will serve to also draw in private capital in addition to that funding. So you can think about it as seed capital. So I would say overarchingly, private sector confidence is rising in line with this just general sense of stabilization around public finances, firstly. Secondly, there are actual mechanisms and participation where the private sector is leaning into areas that would otherwise have been historically public goods, and public goods that quite clearly were badly delivered by the state. And out of sheer necessity and a funding shortfall and an execution shortfall, the private sector is leaning in. So my slightly elevated score is just saying the incrementalism combined with the direction of travel and these legislation, interventionist and governance dimensions that were mentioned in this budget point to an attempt to fix with what I would argue is political will to do it. I think the finance minister has got cover. I think he's got presidential cover. And there's always risks, as Carol has highlighted, apart from internal compromise. Growth could be weaker than it otherwise would be, and instantly that would really ruin our indebtedness profile. You could have SOEs demanding money after they've been put on a shorter leash. The grants, while very justified in terms of the ample levels of poverty, the grant system is under review. Yeah. There's a court injunction that hinted at elevated individual allocation, so that's another area of risk. So there are perils that no doubt loom, but I think to be, in my view, judicious with respect to the budget, it signaled, as I said, continuity, credibility with regard to past promises being locked in, and the numeracy does seem plausible and feasible.
Edward Kieswetter, we like to think of repairs as a linear process, that bad guys mess it up, good guys come in, or better guys, or less bad pussies, fewer bad guys are in place, and you start doing a repair job. Now, probably 10 years ago, I shared a stage with Hillary and Bill Clinton, who were in South Africa, and just before Bill Clinton went on stage, the president had just become president of the Republic. He was waiting in the wings, and I said to him, any advice for President Ramaphosa? And Bill Clinton, suffering from jet lag, was quite reedy and thin in his voice, went, don't screw it up. A lot of people think that we've missed the enormous goodwill opportunity of the Ramaphosa administration and that it has been screwed up. Is that fair?
Well, let me first say that I appreciate and am aligned with Ghulam's interpretation of the quality of the budget. So I certainly think the minister acquitted himself as a Minister of Finance should in the best way that he could. Have we missed the moment? I think it's a coin with two sides. I think the politician in our president has tried to create the highest degree of cohesion and consensus, because politics is the art of the possible. And if you're the leader of a political party who has deployed you, they can recall you. So those things aren't unreal, right? That's the one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is then you run the risk of putting the interest of politics ahead of the interest of the country, and that then slows you down. Now,
and that has happened.
And the elephant that has to be addressed is you have had relative success and progress because of trying to balance those two things, the political dynamic and the actual work at hand. Those who are on the side of consensus would argue, but it takes longer, but eventually you gain momentum, and then when you get going, you get going. And I think we're seeing some of that now. Those who argue that we have missed the opportunity would say that we could have made progress earlier. Now, I personally believe that the opportunity that the Government of National Unity has presented itself has given positive dimension to getting things done, but also it has begun to reduce the impact of politics in what we do, and have increased the bias towards delivery. Because political parties exist when they get voted in, and when you drop the way you do, you have to deal with the real problem, not the political problem. And I think that's a good thing. As a progressive Democrat myself, the GNU for me works. And I think that we will see, just from last year to this year, we would not have had 3 attempts at the budget if there was a one-party dominant political energy in the room.
What would have happened in the last year had that 2 percentage point VAT increase gone through? Had the ANC had the final say and the finance minister been able to rubber stamp 2 percentage points on VAT, what would this year's budget look like?
Well, I think, firstly, if the ANC were the only party, it pretty much would have gone through. You can place money on that. And we would have all been vis and dugbek, but we've had to live with it. For me, our own observation is, and has always been, that whilst a Minister of Finance must always hold in his hand the ability to increase taxes as one of his or her instruments, that there are other things that they must do before that. And one of the things we have argued as the South African Revenue Service is to say, if your compliance level is in the early to mid-60s, if your tax gap is between 500, 600 billion rand, if you have a stock of debt and outstanding returns worth several billions, then if you focus on efficient tax administration, it's money that already belongs to you. But also, increasing taxes, you reach a point of inflection. And actually, we've seen that a percentage increase in VAT doesn't necessarily translate into an increase in revenue because people behave differently. They arbitrage, they undermine. So no policy choice is free, as we saw with the COVID banning of alcohol and tobacco. We are still struggling with the unintended consequence of that policy choice. And so I believe that it's a blessing for us that the 2% didn't go through, which I credit to the GNU dynamic. But it also gave us a year to demonstrate our position that says focus on tax collection. You know, many of the media houses, I won't mention any names, think that the 21.3 will come from the commodity boom. Well, we do think the commodity boom will, in the next 12 to 24 month cycle, have a much bigger.
So very little impact in this
minimal
cycle.
impact in this cycle, because companies also, you know, they
Postpone.
And so our own analysis is, and by the way, we still have to collect the 21.3 billion in case you think it's in the bank. But our analysis shows that about 5 billion of the above estimate of 12 months ago, about 5 billion will probably come from the mining sector, another 2 billion from improvement in consumption taxes and finance sector. But between 60 and 67% of the additional revenue we know will have to come from compliance activities, from a more efficient administration of the laws. And so my contention is still invest in SARS, close the tax gap, reduce the debt stock before you consider an increase in taxes.
Well, see, it's one of the biggest risks, and Carol referred to this earlier, about the risk of complacency. We believe that the work has been done. Operation Bull and Tail has done its work. Eskom is on the repair path. We've got alternative sources of energy coming in. But we're seeing a little bit of that confidence translating into perhaps a little bit of obstreperousness within an Eskom, and you were on the board of Eskom for a period of time. I see you twitch a little bit from the PTSD. But it's a massive institution. It doesn't want to necessarily relinquish its power, yet it is pushing back against the unbundling of Eskom in a way that is perhaps counterproductive.
It absolutely is. And I think that is one of my biggest concerns around. So it's brilliant. We've seen the progress that the reforms have delivered. There has been an improvement in the trading environment. In the survey and the analysis that we do of business leaders, they do concur that it has been an improvement in the trading environment, which is brilliant. We're seeing it in business confidence, and we are hoping that it's going to start trickling in from an investment perspective and start to raise that gross fixed capital formation that we need so much. But then we might have fixed generation, Bruce, but the biggest stumbling block now and the biggest constraint is in transmission. So we were very worried, obviously, as the business community when we had the minister's announcement about the Eskom unbundling and the derail and what we saw as a capitulation of the original position that the TSO is going to have to be independent and the transmission assets are going to have to sit within the TSO to enable, you know, this competitive electricity market, you know, to can actually function. But you also have the Eskom legal challenge that is underway at the moment, where Eskom is saying to NESA, you were not supposed to have granted the 8 traders the licenses that you have granted them because we are worried that they are going to steal our customers. We are worried that they are actually going to not just steal any customer, but the most lucrative customers. You know, we are worried that this is an infringement, you know, of our license. So we worry that as we start to see these gains, institutions like Eskom and Transnet are thinking that what is the point of the reforms in the first place? if we now have structural load shedding, which has been dealt with, if we're now sitting without load shedding, you know, and it's very interesting and very remarkable the progress that we've made.
Yeah.
2023, 283 days of load shedding out of 365. 2024, 2025, 14 days of load shedding, and 2026 is probably maybe a bit too early. And I can confidently say that load shedding is actually behind us, but we do have to actually.
Have you
But
still
we
got
do
the Eskom's
actually-
Push app? Who's still got
I
the
do,
app on
but
their
they're
phone?
advertising useless things there. I don't know what
Half
they're
the
doing.
room still has the
Yeah,
app.
yeah, absolutely. So we do have to therefore see this reform to its logical conclusion. You know, I worry that we are now starting to conflate Eskom's institutional interests with the national interest. You know, when we went on to do the energy reform, it was never about Eskom. I mean, the minister would go on the public domain and actually say that, I'm not trying to fix Eskom, I'm trying to fix and I'm trying to ensure that we open up the energy sector in this country. And I think that is what we have done. That is what has actually gained us the results. So I worry that Eskom has now been given this much power. You see, they cannot, Bruce, be the cause of our energy crisis and think that they can be the gatekeeper of its solutions. They really cannot be.
Say that again. Say that again. We'll get the quote right. We want to get the quote right. They cannot be the cause of the crisis and
Of
the
the energy
gatekeeper
and the
of its
gatekeeper of
solutions.
its solutions.
That's a
It
good
cannot
quote.
be. So we are bringing in private sector participation, and I really think that this is important because for me, it starts to de-risk the economy from politics. It starts to actually give us the assurance that should we have a state capture 2.0, should we have, I hope not, a Paul Mashatile coming in as the president of the country, and it starts the looting where Zuma finished it, you know, and it starts continuing his scandals and his criminal activities. We can therefore be ensured that you have a government that is presiding over an economy that has got less state dominance. You can ensure that the critical sectors of the economy are not only dependent on government, because that is precisely what happened. They actually targeted your SARS, your Eskom, your Transnet, the 743 SOEs to siphon funds out of the state. So if those continue to be government monopolies, if we have the wrong president of the country again, it therefore puts us at risk, you know, to say that we are going to continue to see and experience what we experienced before. So reforms for me are a way of how we put the levers in place to ensure that even if the political volatility, you know, continues to, because politics will do what it always does, but even if the politics do what they do, the economy can be able to function. We can still have the generation of electricity, not because Eskom has given it to us, but because you've got other players in the sector, that are actually enabling it. And Transnet and SITA monopoly that has been ended and whatever the case is. So it is very important.
Gulam, this is the Busi I was talking about earlier. But and that is, again, I mentioned PTSD earlier, not lightly, but there is this inbuilt fear that the politics derails everything once again, Gulam, regardless of who is there, considering how few honest people there are at the upper echelons of South African politics, and not just South African politics, for goodness sake. You know, the president did use his authority recently to overrule the health department on the national health insurance scheme, which is fiscally impossible to do without breaking the country in its existing form, and there are multiple court cases seeking to prevent it, and the president very wisely has gone, okay, let's just take the debate out of it for a time being, let's see what the courts say, and then we can re-engineer it. May he need to do the same on electricity? Start signing, what do they call them in America? Executive orders. Hasn't worked out all that well for Donald Trump. They keep getting kicked back to him. But the president has got, in the limited time available to him, a real chance to set in stone the reform process that has begun. Kula, a comment?
No, I think one of the reasons why we can cheer for President Ramaphosa is he's broken this long-standing trend of political cult of personality. For good reason, there was the halo of former President Nelson Mandela. There was, I'm going to call it a cult, but it was constructive. And he was
did his job,
able
yeah.
to carry South Africa in a manner that certainly helped to forge the type of reform processes locally, as well as an international stature that probably still is unrivaled, at least in the democratic dispensation. There was also the cult of personality around Jacob Zuma. And to contrast that with where we are now, to President Ramaphosa's credit, he's attempted to rebuild South Africa's institutional fabric. And for that institutional fabric to serve as the guardrails of society. The process has been slow. In many respects, there's been more top-down success than bottom-up success. Probably one of the exceptions in both top and bottom-up success is SARS, but it's exceptional. So this idea of rebuilding South African institutions, forestalling the risk of personalities and appointed authority that does meaningfully sit in the presidency coming to derail South Africa will always be a risk. So I think we're on this journey of two things, and at Standard Bank we talk about institutional reform and macro reforms. The institutional reforms speak to this idea of imposing these, as I said, guardrails with regard to all of the governance processes and dealing with all the criminal activity in South Africa, and macro reforms with regard to electricity, ports, water sanitation, and so forth. And I suppose each stream can garner different scores. And right now, water woes, especially in Gauteng, would probably be top of most in mind with respect to macro failings, which links also to institutional failings. But you're right, the president has got a limited time, and but I would argue we've shifted from stabilization to momentum.
Yeah.
We're not compounding just yet, but there's a momentum which 2026 can confirm on the back of many of 2025 stabilization milestones.
Carol, talk to me about the politics and the backroom talk on succession plans and things. Because Busi is expressing a very real concern that many South Africans have, that we do have a regressive ANC. But do they even matter by the time the next election comes by? Looking at declining polling numbers by the ANC, looking at the municipal elections coming up later this year, Gogo is busy putting her feet in potholes in Joburg and is capitalizing on Panyaza Hotels Lesufis' latest gaffe when it comes to water provision in the country. I can't help but feel that perhaps focusing on the ANC as kingmaker or as government maker at the next national election is actually something we shouldn't be worrying about.
You see, guess what? They might, in fact, be the kingmaker, because they might not be the biggest party, but they might still be the kingmaker. And so, unfortunately, the ANC does still matter.
Okay.
Even if they're polling 40% now, and even if they had to drop further, that is still a substantial part of the electorate. So the ANC matters for as long as there isn't an alternative to the ANC. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the DA is not yet that alternative and might not be able to be that alternative. We're going to see what the DA does in the next few months.
It's got its leadership elections coming up, yeah?
New leadership. So we don't know. But so I think the ANC does matter, so it really does matter who does become the next president of the ANC. I don't think it's a shoo-in for Paul Mashatile. There was a stage, Adrian wrote a very good column about it this week, I think. There was a stage at which he was a shoo-in. He had sort of wrapped it up. But I think there are other people on the horizon now. So Toko Didiza, who the Ramaphosa camp is quite seriously putting forward, if they had to succeed in building a broad enough alliance around her, the ANC is really a confederation. You have to build an alliance to win an election. So unfortunately, that alliance would have to have some dubious people in it to win. But if she was at the top, I think there's they're in with a shout if they can do that. and then lots of people talking about Patrice Motsepe. I personally don't think Patrice is going to get a look in. People are very excited about it, but he hasn't got the support in the ANC. The ANC is not going to choose him as a leader. And they don't take kindly to outsiders. So I don't know who becomes the next president. It's possible the ANC isn't the biggest party, maybe the second biggest party, but they're still going to be substantial. And in this coming election, I think this local government election is going to be a really decisive election, because if they have a very poor showing there, we know it's only further downhill from there. So I think, as always in South Africa, turbulent times, lots of opportunity moments, and yes, we've missed lots of opportunities along the way, but there are more, there will be more, and voting is one of those opportunity moments.
And the Government of National Unity, for all of the skepticism around its durability and its potential durability, Carol, when it was first sort of tacked together, is actually standing quite an interesting test, isn't it?
It is, but it's only hanging to, it's a very dysfunctional entity.
It's like Christmas lunch at most people's families.
It's a dysfunctional entity in that, it does really function as several
Silos.
different parts.
Yeah.
It doesn't really function as one government. But that said, it's hanging together, and the reason it's hanging together is purely out of self-interest of both the parties. Neither really actually wants to govern with the EFF, or wants the EFF in the governing coalition, or MK for that matter. So self-interest holds them together, and hopefully will continue to hold them together.
Edward Kieswetter, the politics. Come on, it's almost a retirement date.
I'm going to
what's your
start
reading?
speculating
You're
in
good at this
politics
stuff.
from the 1st of May.
Okay, let's pretend it's Workers' Day.
So let me just say for now, I agree with Carol in her analysis. But there are still dark horses. I think for me, if I was the DA, I would be seriously concerned why I am still being seen as a party to protect minority interests.
And why your
Because-
21% ceiling is
Because
unlikely to
even
rise.
with my historically disadvantaged maths, there are not many white people who's going to vote for you, even if all of them voted for you.
Yeah.
So you have to transform, and I think that's a challenge that the DA understands. Whether they can transcend that is going to be their biggest learning. But I do think, though, on the problem that Buzi raised, the president has made a call. He has not approved the current formulation by Eskom. Someone said to me recently, but how can he disagree with 4 engineers? I said, because it's not an engineering problem.
They've sorted the engineering problem.
It's a market problem, not an engineering problem. And you cannot have Eskom being the referee and the player. And so I support the president in this regard. We need an independent systems operator that all generators can compete on an equal footing. And I think our president will hold the line on that. I do think that we will see a greater, our politics is going to be messy for the next 10 to 15 years. We must accept that. We're not going to have a majority party soon, a single majority party.
And that's not a bad thing, by the way.
It's not a bad thing, because I also think that we'll see a greater decoupling between politics and progress. We are not a centralized one-party state like China or Singapore, where you have deeply involved government, but they have also created meritocracies, true meritocracies with governments that can deliver. And I think the ANC could have been that party had they developed a meritocracy alongside their political dominance. And that's the boat they missed. And it's too late now. So I think we will see a further decoupling between politics and progress. I will see, I believe, and we've already begun to see that in electricity, in logistics, in water, in crime and corruption. We are busy talking, when Busi and I were at a meeting, where Business Against Crime, BLSA, B4SA are all at the party, at the table, talking about how do we as a collective, not government or a department in government, how do we as society fix crime and corruption? I think we will do it. I'm convinced that with the solid, substantive partnership between government and business, we're going to... So I see a further decoupling, a greater participation by the competence of business, balanced by the social accountability that government has. You need both. Businesses are still profit-driven. They still have a shorter-term motive for... If you accuse politicians of having short-term election motives, business has short-term profit motives. So you have to have that balance.
Immediate profit.
Yeah.
Short-term is
So I think where we are at the moment, we'll see more capital being crowded in. We'll see more competence being crowded in. We'll see that balance. And I agree with Gulam. We have turned a corner. We will see momentum gaining. And I think the president was the right person to lead that, because he, having lived in both worlds, understands how the system works. So I'm very positive.
I mean, something to maybe raise the optimism levels a little bit. I was talking to a construction company. They do projects between 300 million and 1 billion rand. I said, so what's the status? What are things like? And he goes, we're flat out optimistic. Yeah. And I'm like, well, hold on, just explain. And for the last 18 months, they've not had a single disruption as a result of the construction mafia. Their assessment of it is that crime intelligence seems to be working better, that there are preemptive steps. There were times where they would factor in sort of on a 12-month project an extra month for stoppages and delays and people being held hostage on sites and stuff because they build in more vulnerable parts of the country. These guys, they operate on the sharp edge. And they just haven't seen that. So something, and that's an example of one, but something is working. Yeah. But I wonder, Gulam, who's going to rebuild the country? Because in the run-up to 2010, we had a whole bunch of listed construction companies. They were able to raise capital. They were full of construction professionals. It was phenomenal. I think now the only really big gorilla we have is Wilson Bailey Homes. And if they're asked to build the Cape Town airport, 22 billion rand, after the fire this week, and of course the previous plans involved there in terms of expanding for this optimistic decade ahead that Cape Town is planning for, who's going to fix the water reticulation? Who's going to ensure that the power reticulation systems all function? Do we even have the skills anymore to do it in our economy?
We have lost capacity, and we've lost capacity substantially. Two things. One, just to endorse your point about brimming confidence in the industry. I mean, survey data does tell us that business confidence in the construction industry is rising. Imports associated with construction is also rising as a further harbinger of promise. But you're correct in a sense that we've lost capacity. And if you look at investment as a share of GDP, it's around 14%, which of course is...
And that needs to be what, at 25% or something?
22, 23.
22.3, thank you.
So at 14%, it is incredibly low, and it's horrendously low. It speaks to why we could remain locked in a 1 to 1.5% GDP growth path if that does not rise beyond 20% and ideally beyond 25%, when that would correlate more meaningfully with 3% real GDP growth. So the ambition there is to really load fixed investment. I'm a little less concerned about rebuilding capacity. Confidence in the capacity for the state to partner with the private sector and for it to be commercially viable and for political continuity to hold steady. So that capacity will come back if there is a view that South Africa's policy environment will remain predictable, maybe imperfect, but predictable through 2029. So I think those are, for me, the most substantive hurdles. Capital is fungible, capacity is mobile. I think capacity, even if it is foreign capacity, it comes to instill itself in local projects, will do. behind your back, there's at least 4 cranes in the distance building a new boutique hotel and renovating other infrastructure in what is arguably South Africa's most significant infrastructure spend, at least for the next few years, at the harbour. And so I'm a little less concerned, as I've suggested, about capacity re-establishing itself. It is just simply more meaningfully confidence that political stability and predictability will hold for the multi-years that investment requires its return.
Because our growth outlook now, at best, and Treasury has been consistently over-optimistic in its own projections as to what growth will deliver. At best, according to Treasury's optimistic view, we get to 2% by 2027, which doesn't solve the problem we're going to be trying to solve in 3 weeks' time, which is at the On the Record summit, where we're talking about how to build 5 million jobs by 2029. Those are not going to happen without growth, inclusive, exclusive, call it what you like. Without growth, that doesn't happen, Gulam. So how do we get the growth engine ticking faster, urgently?
The rule of law. Confidence in South Africa's governance frameworks. It's something at Standard Bank that we're particularly passionate about, in the sense that it is our judgment that the rule of law is everything. I would go so far as to say that whereas we typically school to believe that capital plus that pixie dust of innovation spurs growth, and by capital we talk of physical, human, and financial capital combined with innovation spurs growth. But as a rule of thumb, I would say to 25% of the reason economies grow is because of those economics 101 attributes. The other 2/3 and some comes from governance. It comes from the rule of law and the capacity for the rule of law to engender efficiency, predictability, and predictability is currency for risk-taking. So if we get the governance environment, the rule of law environment fixed, and if the NPA had mild reflections of echoes of SARS, we would have made enormous strides. So there we've been slow. But I just want to also conclude by maybe defending National Treasury. I like the fact that their forecasts for GDP are somewhat pedestrian. In a sense, it's 1.5% to 2% over a 3-year horizon, despite all of the accent on reforms. In other words, they're not baking in just yet the idea that these reforms could, at the end of this chapter, this decade, deliver more upside outcomes. They're even not yet assuming that SARS machine, in terms of uncovering due taxes that haven't been paid, could come to fruition, and that isn't yet included in the revenue projections. So I think there's a level of plausible conservatism that's baked into National Treasury's estimate, which is better than rose-tinted optimism.
What are you telling Sim in terms of, he comes to you and says, we've got a business, half of our revenues come from outside of South Africa on the African continent. Remains the home base, it needs to be strong. What is your forecast to Sim in the lift when you bump into him in Rosebank? And he says, what's happening? What does this budget do for growth?
As a firm, we're leaning in. Maybe unoriginal, but we're leaning in with respect to our engagements with the private sector, both in terms of, aiding with thought leadership, if we think we have that capacity. We're leaning in with our financing, in the sense of we're partnering with all of the SOEs. We're leaning in with respect to sectors that we think are going to buttress South Africa's foundations, meaning the fixed investment narrative. But we're doing that across Africa. It's part of Standard Bank's DNA, and maybe because the very fact that we're sponsoring this budget breakfast with esteemed individuals is part of our leaning in posture to be part of a solution. And I think if you know Sim, you'll know that.
Now you've hit the top floor of the building, you've gone down twice already, he just wants a number.
The number, you mean growth?
Yeah, growth number. By 2027, Treasury says 2%. You're saying they are correct to be conservative, implies that your growth forecast is higher.
No, we're also around 2% out to that point, but I would quickly wrap it in, encase it in saying we think there's more upside risk than downside risk.
Okay, cool. Edward Kieswetter, are your colleagues at Treasury overly conservative or sensibly conservative? Are they building a little bit of headroom so this what very positive budget that we saw yesterday delivered here in Cape Town doesn't then become a once-off, that actually we start, the momentum that Willem has referred to earlier, we continue to build on that in the years ahead?
I think they are conservative, and I agree that at this stage it's better for them to be conservative than optimistic.
Because there are risks.
The issue, though, for me is on the revenue side. I think the revenue improvement is structural, not cyclical. We've seen the progressive growth in our revenue despite going through an entire business cycle. We came from boom, we went into COVID, post-COVID, hopefully heading back into boom, but throughout that our revenue has been increasing at a compound annual growth rate of 7% over the last 7 years in an economy that has grown slower than that. So I do think there is a cyclical improvement in our revenues. If you add to that the fact that we are going to contain our debt, it means our debt service cost as a percentage of our total expenditure should come down. I know the media, the analysts are looking at an absolute number, but it's the trend that's important. I think that's correct. The discipline, the fiscal discipline has brought that about. It didn't come about by accident. So we are where we planned to be. On the expenditure side, I still have some concerns that some of the big decisions and our wage bill, if you take our wage bill as a percentage of GDP, is one of the highest in the world.
Yeah. Wage bill isn't a government wage bill.
Yes, and we are not converting that into productive outcome.
No.
So that's the first challenge. Alongside that is we are not doing terribly well. Is terribly well even right? Terribly well. It's like saying the joy is getting worse. We're not doing as well as we need to be in the transition of our skills. Our matriculants, as long as we declare matric pass rate as victory, we're going to have more and more unemployable young people, and that increases the risk of unemployed youth, restlessness, etc. So I think on the expenditure side, we can be more efficient, but also we need to take a hard look at how do we prepare our young people from schooling to be prepared for this future world of work. I don't think any of us in the room can fully predict the disruptive and exponential nature that the next wave of AGI will bring us. I think we are going to see, in the next 2 to 3 years, a significant disruption by the agentic generation of AIs, which will fundamentally change. We see that in SARS already, fundamentally change how people work. And if we can't produce that for what the labor market needs, we're going to be left behind. And that's my concern about the quality of our spend and the way we allocate resources.
And we haven't even begun to scratch the surface on AI at all. I mean, there was a report published about 3 weeks ago, which has led to an enormous sell-off in software companies in the United States, because it's predicting by 2027 that this global system as we have it right now is going to fall apart, so that AI is going to be replacing swathes of work and workers, and millions of people are going to be unemployed. Probably scare tactics, probably overdone in the short term, but it's a real concern, and we're still working on 19th century principles, and the 21st century is coming to overtake us really quickly.
Well, if you take of the agentic AI right now, it's going to replace all cognitive tasks that human beings. So problem solving is no longer a problem. It's ubiquitous. It's free. Any kid can do it. It's problem posing. Are we solving the right problems is going to be where we differentiate ourselves. It's the application of judgment. It's about true creativity, and our schooling system is not preparing that. Secondly,
no schooling system is. I don't know.
Well,
maybe, I think Singapore and others are.
I think some people, China, Singapore, are certainly ahead of the curve. I think Elon Musk is one of the smartest human beings we have. Not one of the wisest ones, but he's solving the right problems.
Yeah.
I have to agree with him there. But when he says that in the future work will become optional and abundance will be ubiquitous, I lean towards that. It may not take as soon as he says it will be, but if you think about the investment, the lead time to that, is going to get shorter and shorter and shorter. And so my concern is the quality of our spend and the early investment in human capacity that we're going to get caught out in the next 5 to 10 years.
But to your earlier comment that government isn't structured to really problem solve is a deep concern, therefore, and even deeper.
It's not a South African concern, though. It's a global concern about how governments are organized. And if you then add to that the absence of meritocracy, you are in a scramble of the worst kind.
That's a cheerful thought. Give me a sense of why we should be feeling a lot more chipper but not complacent about the budget, the current budget cycle. Busi, I'm going to start with you.
You have to pose that question again.
Why should we be, and I can't remember the question, why should we be optimistic but not complacent in the next budget cycle based on last year's mess up relative to this year's success? And we look forward in the budget cycle 3 years.
Yeah, I think we should be optimistic because when you look at the work that we're doing, I really think that we're doing sustainable work. We're making structural changes to the economy, Bruce, that are actually going to deliver the results that we need to deliver. They might not be fast, but it's actually going to last. And I think that is the most important thing. What we're doing as a country is not EPWP, this work for 18 months or whatever the case is. This is fundamentally changing the structure of our economy to ensure that we can actually outlast whatever challenges that may actually occur in the future, but not just outlast challenges, to reposition South Africa to being the gateway to the African continent. I mean, Africa is the continent of the future. Capital is actually looking for addresses where it's actually going to invest. Africa is where they are looking at, but they might not necessarily be looking at South Africa with everything that we have going for us, as a country, with our resilience, with our economic growth, with being the strongest economy in the continent, with being the most advanced from a telecoms and financial services and retail perspective, technologically advanced, deep and liquid capital, with all those good things. They are not currently looking at South Africa. They are looking at Ghana, they are looking at Rwanda. As small and as unsophisticated as those economies are, they are looking at Namibia, they are looking at, and so this repositioning and these changes and this work that we're doing as a country is actually going to put us back in the map, to ensure that we can be the gateway to the African continent by fixing the basics, by fixing the fundamentals, by ensuring that stuff works.
But we haven't done enough to regain the trust we lost in 2008. I mean, the three horsemen of the economic apocalypse, the global financial crisis, Eskom and Jacob Zuma. We've not recovered from that, and the world has not looked at us in the same way since then, and is hugely skeptical of the ability to pull ourselves back from the brink.
And I think that is just the nature of capital. Capital moves on. They don't sit and wait around for you to fix your problems. They have to actually invest that money somewhere.
Make it worthwhile.
They have to make it worthwhile. It has many addresses. If your address is not attractive, it actually moves on. Do you think that Goodyear, after having made that decision of shutting its operations in South Africa and going to Namibia, even if we were to come back as a country and say the challenges that you had, BAT, even if we were to come back and say the challenges that made you to shut your doors in South Africa, we'll fix them, come back. Because remember, capital is playing a long game.
Yep.
So they are not going to up and leave, just because, you have actually gotten your house in order. This is the conversation we're having with Transnet and Barbara Creasy, by the way, to say, yes, we're doing all of this work, we're making all of these investments, we're fixing the problems, but a lot of companies, Bruce, are already using the Mauritius ports, they're already using the Mozambique ports, they're already using the Namibian ports. I'm sure they've signed long-term contracts, in terms of that certainty of ensuring that their goods can get to market. If VW, for instance, produces polos for VW all over the world, and they've now decided to actually take their goods out of the market from Namibia, if South Africa were to come back today and say that we want you back as a customer, use our ports again, if we fail as South Africa to deliver, it means their operations, not just in South Africa, but all over the world, are actually going to be impacted. So those risks, are not risks that capital actually takes easily. So I really think that we're going to have to do a lot of work in terms of keeping our customers warm, in terms of actually ensuring that we give them the confidence that the changes that we're making as a country are actually going to be sustainable. So I worry that probably maybe we might not, we were having this conversation earlier on in the year with BER to say that we're seeing confidence is ticking up. But why is this gross fixed capital formation number still sitting at 14%? Why is investment not trickling in? And I think that is the conundrum that we're actually trying to solve. And the only explanation, Bruce, is that, yes, confidence might have gone up, but is it high enough?
And the great tragedy of this, I remember being in Davos years ago and trying to get Patrice Motsepe to make a comment about something. And if you that's a job, trying to get Patrice to talk about that, to try and nail him down on anything. And he said, "Oh no, you don't want to talk to me. Let me take you to a much more interesting room." And he then hospital passed me into a room where Tito Mboweni, who was leading the delegation that year, I think it must be 2021, was hosting a small, tiny group of hungry-looking investors. And the chief financial officer at Heineken at the time went, "What are you going to do about water? Your water and electricity shortage is really hurting us." And we haven't moved on sufficiently from that conversation. Gulab, you gave the budget 7.5. Do we get to an 8 out of 10 budget this time next year, do you think?
Bruce, briefly, I think South Africa has got its best macroeconomic backdrop in about a decade for a few very quick reasons. I think internationally, despite President Trump, global growth has turned out better than feared. Steady, if unspectacular, but steady growth. And I think that provides somewhat of a rising tide. Secondly, international commodity prices are elevated and likely, for the most part, even if it's only select commodity prices, to remain fairly burly. And commodities is currency for South Africa as well as many other nations on the continent. Thirdly, locally, numerous positive milestones last year that I earlier hinted at. We're off the FATF list. Fixed investment is likely to grow over the next 2 years in mid-single digits or thereabouts. Cyclically, low inflation, which infers stronger real incomes. We're experiencing a decline in interest rates. And all of these combined just signal that there's more tailwinds than headwinds. And I'll just conclude by saying, is there evidence of international favor with respect to South Africa and South African assets? So if you look at our yield curve has literally plunged over the last year. And that's structural to the extent that it will feed into lower government funding, part of the reason why the budget has delivered this consolidation. Corporates that lend in the bond market can now structurally lend at a lower trend rate of interest rate prospectively. And if you look at the spreads between South Africa's risk assets and whether it is the United States or even peer markets or even other emerging markets, our spreads, which is a barometer of risk, has declined, signaling that South Africa may be the cleaner of the dirty shirts relative to its peers and emerging markets. So again, if it's incrementalism, if it's direction of travel, and if it is at the margin, South Africa is enjoying this brief period of favor, which we must capitalize on.
A brief period of favor. Are you concerned that it wanes again?
I say it's a brief period for us to lock in. My central concern, and I already hinted at this earlier on, is the political cycle. The political cycle has always been that key item that bedevils South Africa's prospects. Carol hinted at local government elections as being critical. We know in 2021, those elections heralded the ANC's demise. When I say demise, fall below 50%, because the ANC back then fell to around 46%. In other words, foregrounding what we saw in 2024 with respect to national elections when they fell to 40. So these local elections will be significant in terms of measuring where the ANC sits, whether the DA elevates, which seems plausible. Remember, we had already had coalition governments in 2021. 5 of the 8 metros required coalitions back then already. So I think this will dictate relative play between these two parties, but again, underscored by Carol, South Africa is likely to remain beset by two big parties, the ANC and the Democratic Alliance, at whatever favor they enjoy. Smaller parties, I think they are more distress to the political systems. They even become mayor in some metros, much
That
to
works
the
out
lament
well.
of citizens. So I think South Africans in the forthcoming elections will have to think hard about their political choices and also about whether smaller parties offer genuine currency in the political contestation event. So politics will always loom large as probably my single most important item of downside risk.
Okay, thank you. Carol, journalists are not by nature optimistic.
Yeah.
The job is to point out what is wrong. It is up to others to fix what is wrong. But give me a sense of your going through the budget documents, and you've got the mighty tome there. It looks thinner than in previous years. Certainly, the speech yesterday was half the length of your good friend Pravin Gordhan's 10,000-word missives, Commissioner. It was under 5,000 words, I think 4,798 or something. I didn't count all of them. But your sense of it, there has to have been a different mood in the tent yesterday.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a completely different mood, and there's a different mood in the country. And I agree, it's a very good news budget. Everything is pointing in the right direction. And I think politically, yes, politics is always going to be our challenge. It's always going to be what sets us back, brings us forward. But on the big picture, on the big political picture, we're doing incredibly well. We really are. I mean, we've got a coalition government, a democracy that works, all the big picture political things, freedom of the press, all of those things, and we're now getting a genuine embedding of free markets, actually, of liberalized markets, which I don't think can be reversed. Even if, you get a completely different party in power, I don't think that those market reforms that are being done in electricity and freight logistics, I don't think they can be reversed because there will be no other alternative.
Yeah.
So I think we're on a much better wicket from that point of view. I think what is difficult, and you spoke about the conundrum of, well, why don't we get investment? And I think that is what we really have to look at now. And I would just want to raise the point that the reason we don't get investment is to make it so hard for investors to come here, okay? There's rules, there's regulations, there's government doesn't answer your calls, can't get appointments, can't get licenses,
Elon Musk says
et
BEE
cetera.
still gets in the way. And Kieswetter says Elon Musk
we
is
haven't
clever.
discussed BEE, and I think BEE is a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that we do have to look at BEE in the mining sector for interest. For instance, we're supposed to be a mining economy. But we're not. We really we're failing. So I think we've got onto a much better wicket, and there's space. So there's space to have these debates, which we can always be grateful for.
Kieswetter, wrap it up.
I think reason for optimism is definitely fiscal discipline. Don't underestimate that. It does affect everything else. And I think the minister has demonstrated that he's going to hold the line, and I know he's got a lot of political pressure. Secondly, I expect the president to provide a lot more policy clarity where there is conflicts. So he's done that. I saw the first time in the electricity when we were debating about do we raise it from 1 megawatt to 10 megawatts to 100 megawatts. In the end, he took the decision.
Big. Yeah.
He took the decision.
Yeah.
And made the announcement that even surprised the minister responsible at the time. I think his line with Eskom, it's going to be the same. So I think he's going to be a lot more assertive and provide a lot more policy clarity. So I do think, and the markets rewarded us for it, not just the stock exchange and the bond yields. I think also just generally coming off the FATF list and all of that works, the lower inflation environment. Now, what is the hesitance, therefore? I think, first of all, capital is cautious. And so it will look to see what will happen in 2026 for the local government elections. I think that's probably going to be more important in 2029 elections, because it'll give directionally what's going to happen with the politics, and then people will make peace with that and accept it. I do think that part of the wait and see is perception driven. I mean, we haven't had a single in recent history default on our debt, and yet we are being priced as if we're a high-risk destination for investment, for debt, or for capital. The ratings agencies, I personally believe, have a built-in bias in how they judge South Africa. In contrast to that, this, in addition to Busi's point about Africa being the continent of the future, all of our problems look through a different lens, opportunities that are just too appetizing for capital to stand and wait forever. Predictability is the premium. They'll take a risk on what's going to happen. I think 2026 is a watershed year for us. And I suspect and hope that we have turned a corner and that we'll see the current foundation of predictability and certainty, relative certainty, to gain momentum, that we will see taking off towards the back end of this year and definitely in the next 5 years.
I'm going to ask all of you to channel your inner Lion King for a moment. I haven't warned you about this. And if you want to play, you can play. If you don't want to play, I understand. But if you were to take the characteristics of an African animal and say, what characteristics do we best need to embody to thrive in 2026 and beyond, what would it be? And I asked this question at Kieswetter, and you see my little black bag, the Woolies bag, and you don't know what's in it. I remember when you were chief executive of Alexander Forbes, you invited me to host a budget breakfast for you, and you invited Pravin Gordhan along. And at the end of that budget breakfast, you gave Pravin Gordhan a little black bag with a different logo on it, a Mont Blanc logo on it. And he looked slightly agitated and sat down in his chair and quietly left it on the floor. And I noticed this, and I went, he's left his present behind. And I picked it up, and I followed him, and you stopped me. Now, as I remembered the story, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you said, oh, don't worry, there's nothing in it. I just had to be seen to give him something. I knew he'd leave it behind because he doesn't accept gifts. I don't know if you recall that at all, but we missed that level of political and economic integrity.
I mean, Pravin was amazing in that regard, and I can tell you stories about that. I don't think we must desire to be a single animal. South Africa has to learn to hunt as a pack.
The painted dog,
so I would say we should be a flight of geese or other animals that fly in formation.
Fly in formation, I like this.
That work together towards a common objective. We don't need a single animal. And in fact, I think the ground has been set for more social partners, more private partners to come in and have a single objective, which is building South Africa. And that's why I honestly believe that politics will play less and less of a role in the next 10 years as other partners come in towards a common goal. I do think that one wrong move, however, if the next commissioner is a person that hasn't...
When is that announcement happening, by the way?
Well, hopefully in the next week or two.
Okay.
But if the next commissioner...
No, and won't be you?
Definitely not.
Okay, sure.
But if the next commissioner is not a person of integrity and competence...
I hear Tomiani is looking for a job, no?
The point is, one bad decision can undo everything. And so that's the concern that most of us, many South Africans would have. And to end up just on, I need your sympathy, just when Treasury talk about numbers, we have to make the numbers happen. So just put this into your pipe and smoke it. In the next month, we have to collect 340 billion rand.
Wow.
That's 14 billion rand every working day.
So what are you doing here then?
And we have peaks and, and we have peaks and troughs. So just between today and tomorrow, I don't know what your revenue target is, but mine is 115 billion rand.
Looks.
So that's the enormity of the work we do. And my message to you is don't ever take SARS for granted. Don't allow it ever to be captured by any political or any partisan interest. Stand up and fight for this valued treasure of our democracy. Without it, our democracy would be unfunded.
Look at that. Hey. But if I was to hold you to one animal, a flight of geese flying in formation.
Yeah.
Carol, do you want to play the game?
If I have to.
You do.
Springbok.
The springbok.
We've all got to
Excellent.
be Springboks. We'd all be so much happier.
Gulam?
An ant.
An ant. Excellent.
Disciplined, organized, but a formidable army in community.
I would have gone with honeybees, but ants are good. Ants are very disciplined and collaborative and work together. That's very nice. Busi?
I didn't go to kindergarten, so I don't know much about animals. But which animal works faster? So we have the right formula. We're just going to have to increase the pace. We're just going to have to do whatever we're doing, but let's do it faster. So which animal would that be?
I think, and I'm going to put you out of your misery. This guy. He's not the prettiest,
Okay. Wow.
but he's the
It's
toughest.
very cute.
It's the African honey badger.
Oh, wow.
He is possessed with enormous claws, a very strong jaw. When he's grabbed by the neck by a predator, he's able to turn inside his own skin and attack back. He is incredibly innovative and creative. If you've ever watched the Stoffel videos on YouTube, you will know that he cannot be constrained or caged. He uses all resources at his disposal. Okay, other than the misogyny bit, he's a lovely guy. There is a rescue center in Hoedspruit which has rescued Stoffel, and he lives there, but they try and keep him in captivity. And they tried to lock him up in a sort of an open swimming pool area, but he found rocks and he put them up against the walls and climbed out. So they took some rocks away. He still got out. So they cut the trees down close to the walls. He still got out. He made mud balls after a rainstorm and still got out. So they did what any sensible animal keeper would do. They introduced a female into the mix to help. He taught her how to open gates and things like that. And he still got out because when they looked at the videos, she'd stood next to the wall, he jumped up on her back and jumped out. But the toughness and the resilience of the African honey badger, he is by no means complacent. He is by no means a pushover. He will take on predators far bigger than himself or herself, themselves. And to my mind, I like flying in formation. I like the army of ants. I like the springbok. I like this idea that collaborative, maybe all animals in the Lion King can work together. But if there is one, my bet goes on the honey badger. Ladies and gentlemen, online and here, thank you very, very much. And thank you to our panel very much. Edward Kieswetter. Thank you. What's the plan? Come on, tell us what the plan is.
For what?
May, June, July.
Life.
Live.
I have not really narrowed
National
that down
Planning
to
Commissioner,
anything.
come
I
Director of Public Prosecutions.
sadly,
Police Minister.
problems will find me. So I'm sure I will pop up somewhere.
Are you looking to have those problems to solve domestically?
If I'm going to make a difference anywhere in the world, I would do so at home.
Yeah.
That's it. Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ed.